With regard to the next portion of the superintendent's report, we'll be delivering our first budget presentation in a series of budget presentations this evening. And that presentation will actually not just include the overview as it has in previous years, but we'll also talk about the tax cap calculation. We'll talk about some other factors in the budget, and we'll ask tonight the board to affirm three things, essentially. Approval to file the tax cap calculation by March 1st. The administration has to file our tax cap calculation prior to March 1st, and this is the board's last meeting before March 1st, so we'll take the results of this meeting and certainly use that to move forward with the tax cap. So we'll need your approval to file the tax cap at the end of the presentation. We need your affirmation that you will not seek a voter override to exceed the allowable tax levy, and we also need your affirmation that will be compliant with the tax cap and that will use cash reserves to be compliant with the tax cap. So those are the three items. We'll review those three toward the end of the presentation, but we'll begin with an overview, and to deliver that overview, I'll just make my way over to the podium. Okay. So I won't spend too much time on these opening slides, but this evening's presentation is the first in a series of presentations on our 2024-25 fiscal year, school year budget. That'll include an overview of our budget, the tax cap, state aid, debt service, and reserves. Toward the end of the presentation, I will ask the board to affirm three items. There's no formal resolution or formal vote that needs to take place. We just need a consensus of the board to move forward on those three items so that we may file the tax cap calculation with the State Education Department prior to the March 1st deadline. So I'll just begin with our vision. This vision has meant so much to us over the years. It has been a real guiding force for us. It certainly is based on much of what's in our mission statement and in so many other important policies that we have. I won't read it to you, but it's certainly available on the screen for anyone at home to review, and I know our board has seen this each of the last 7 years. One thing, I interview every candidate who gets hired to work in our district. And one thing I hear in every interview about what attracts them to Yorktown is this idea of the whole child and our commitment to not just academics and athletics and arts, but every aspect of educating students in our district. And that comes up in almost every interview that I have. Our school district has done amazing things. We've reached so many wonderful heights and have accomplished so many great feats for individualized student programs, for the collective student cohorts, and then district as a whole. We've done some wonderful things, but we know that our work is far from done. We can never be happy where we are. We always need to get better, and we can get better, and we need to get better. But I'm proud of what we've accomplished so far on that journey toward excellence. Our eSTEAM approach continues to guide us. You've seen at each of the Good News presentations the concept of eSTEAM woven into everything that we do, and it's 7 years and going strong in our district. We offer so many opportunities for children, whether it's the 70 co-curricular activities, the 60 athletic programs that we offer, all of the fine and performing art programs that we are so proud of, and our internship and service opportunities. In fact, with the bond on the horizon, I've had several students in our WISE program at the high school reach out because they're interested in architecture and they're interested in construction management and in engineering, asking if they can be part of the work that would be in our bond should that bond pass tomorrow. We've been recognized all across the state, all across the country, and something I'm proud of, but it's not what defines us. What defines us is the success of our students. And despite the success that we've experienced, we continue to try to enrich our academic program. And we've done that through additional courses over the years. We've added some really rich programming and really rich opportunities for our students, most recently aeronautics and sports medicine. We're always looking at new courses. We haven't made determinations. It's still quite early in the process for us to make determinations for the 24-25 school year, but we've already begun having conversations on what can we do better, differently, and further than we did in the prior year. With regard to process, and I highlight new courses, I'm not going to speak in too much detail about the actual academic program, but I do feel that if somebody looks at our new course offerings, it really drives the point home that we're committed to doing more and doing bigger work for our students each year. And it's evidenced just in one piece of evidence in the offerings that we provide and the development of those courses. With regard to the budget development process, the process began in earnest back in December when we met with the principals, department heads, and discussed what their needs were. We looked at enrollment projections, looked at expiring contracts, and trying to position ourselves to not only provide our students with the best possible academic outcomes and program, but also balancing that with a sensitivity to taxpayers. The process brings us to the series of presentations that begin here tonight, February 12th. That will continue until my final presentation at the end of March, and then the Board of Education will certainly review the budget, ask questions, and make some determinations moving forward up until April 15th, when the board is expected to adopt the budget. May 13th, we'll have our budget hearing, and then finally the third Tuesday in May, May 21st, is our budget vote and trustee election. There are some drivers of the budget, and all of the items on this slide, I'll go through one at a time, but all of the items on this slide are the drivers in each of our budgets each year. With regard to enrollment, we see that enrollment has stabilized when we look back at the time when French Hill was closed initially at 3,912 students back in 2010. We've seen enrollment stabilize over the last 9 or 10 years. With regard to next year's projected enrollment, we are expecting just a modest increase, but what's not captured in enrollment numbers are student needs. Yes, enrollment looks relatively stable, but we have, and in last board meeting, last week's presentation, we saw the increasing needs of our students, and we are obviously always working to meet those needs, but that's not reflected within just a pure, enrollment number. With regard to staffing, because obviously to service our students, we require staff to do that, and we'll always ensure that the staffing levels are aligned to our enrollment and to our student needs. They're both factors that have to be considered. We always look at incoming kindergarten enrollment. That's the biggest challenge in projecting our enrollment is kindergarten enrollment, because those enrollments tend to come in later. They're not already enrolled in our student database, so just monitoring kindergarten enrollment is perennially a challenge. Our clinical needs are something we're evaluating. We have several retirements at this point as well. Some of those positions will be replaced as they were. Others will be looked at to determine if the student enrollment needs demand that we replace those positions as they were. And then we will look to include kindergarten and special education contingency positions within the budget that I present to you, because of the factor that I just mentioned, which is kindergarten enrollment is a really difficult number to nail down, especially in February. And also special education numbers and enrollments and programs are difficult to nail down in February as well. As we head into annual review season, we'll have a lot more clarity around which programs and courses we'll be offering. With regard to health insurance, we're part of a 14 school district consortium that make up the Putnam, Northern Westchester, BOCES Health Insurance Consortium. Next year, we'll see an increase of 5% in the cost of those premiums. And the premiums do cover active employees, their dependents, and should somebody choose to go onto a family level plan. But it also covers our retirees. In terms of pension costs, we'll see an increase in that as well. And that's another consideration in our budget development process. Currently, those rates are at 9.76%. We'll see those rise to 10.02%, a modest increase, but albeit modest, but an increase nonetheless. With regard to the tax cap and the calculation, the inflation factor is over 4%, 4.12% to be specific. The growth factor used to compute that levy is 2%. So there is a disconnect with what we're seeing on the ground and the reality of our school district in terms of filling oil tanks and replacing supplies and materials and items in the health office. We are seeing those prices increase, and that's something that has been a reality not just for this year, but certainly in the prior year. And the maximum allowable levy is 2% in that case, or the growth factor is 2%. With regard to just one piece that I want to share in terms of state aid, you'll hear, and the community will hear, a lot of criticism of the foundation aid formula and school districts being shortchanged. Part of that foundation aid formula is supposed to reflect the rate of inflation. However, the rate of inflation is over 4%, and that's acknowledged at the state level. Yet the number that was used in the governor's budget is just over 2%. And that has resulted in a decrease in foundation aid for our school district and for many school districts. And so that's something that we do hope gets corrected, and that the 4% amount is actually reflected moving forward in the governor's budget. But with regard to the calculation of the tax cap, it's a 4.12% inflation factor, allowable levy growth factor is 2%, and our computation of the allowable tax levy limit is 2.07%. In terms of how we arrived at that number and the mathematics there, it's outlined on the screen, and I know those viewing at home will be able to pause the screen and take a look at the mathematics and the computation to arrive at that number. Ultimately, in dollars, it's 1.747 million, and on a percentage basis, it's 2.07 is our maximum allowable levy increase. With regard to state aid, I spoke about this a moment ago, but there are other factors that, beyond foundation aid, that I have some concerns about, specifically transportation aid. We saw a decrease in that. That's something that we're still hoping will get resolved in the final budget. And the final budget numbers are not anticipated until April 1st or close to April 1st. That's when the state governor is supposed to deliver her final budget. I'm hoping the budget is on time. It was late last year, if you recall, which delayed our introduction of the pre-K program because we were reliant on state dollars to do that. This is what we'll be submitting with regard to, this is the executive budget that I just referenced that shows, it's from the Association of School Business Officials, that shows the decrease in state aid, foundation aid that we'll be receiving. And again, I know the font is small. We'll try to enlarge that for viewers at home. And just for the viewers at home, this presentation will be posted to our website, as will all of our budget presentations for the community to view. But we'll try to enlarge that graph so that it's easier to read on the screen. From a revenue standpoint, we are seeing some modest increases. One that's not so modest is interest income. That has been a pleasant surprise for us in this year and in last. We will be using reserves to cover the difference as we have in previous years. The state aid piece does show a reduction. I think that's important to reference and to note that we're not seeing an increase in state aid. However, the governor's final budget is still to be determined, so I just want to qualify that. In terms of reserves, our district is well positioned when it comes to reserves. My thanks to the Fiscal Advisory Committee, certainly the Audit Committee, for all of their work and their oversight in our district's financial standing. Reserves are healthy. S&P AA plus rating is maintained. And some of the reserves are here, but that certainly doesn't capture all of the reserves that are in our district's budget. Here are some of the additional reserve funds that we have, or all of the reserve funds that we have. And again, as this presentation gets posted to our website, you'll be able to pause it and capture that information. So I'll continue to advance the presentation. Our debt is declining, and this is a big part of why we're able to issue another bond and have that be tax neutral. So as debt retires, principal and interest retire, we look forward to being able to do some further renovations, some really exciting things for our district. All of those have been captured in the presentations that I've delivered for the bond project, Prop 1 and Proposition 2. In terms of the tax cap checklist, there are 3 items that we had discussed, and I just need the board's consensus that of these 3 items that are on the screen. The first is that it's approval to file the tax cap calculation as reported by the March 1st deadline. It's that the Board of Education will not seek voter approval to exceed the allowable tax levy limit, so we're not seeking the supermajority override. And compliance with the tax cap, it's a recognition that it'll require the use of cash reserves to be in compliance with the tax cap. So at this point, I would just ask, Jackie, I'll turn it over to you for...
Can we do this checklist after you finish presentation? We go through questions and then we can affirm it?
We sure can.
I think that would be better, right?
Yep. So not much left to the presentation except for next steps. So the next steps here are just to monitor the final state aid runs, to make sure that we're prioritizing what it is our students need to be positioned for success. We recognize that we're going to have to make some very difficult decisions in this budget development process, specifically with the RFP for our transportation bid out. We expect the opening of the bids to be on February 28th. So that is a very important unknown as we develop the budget. In terms of the other items, well, it's enrollment, it's staffing, it's programmatic needs, and ultimately at the end of the day, what it comes down to is just this last bullet here. It's a budget that balances a high quality of education that has become synonymous with Yorktown with a profound sensitivity to taxpayers. And I believe we've struck that balance well in the past. Our average increases have been quite modest, averaging less than a point in each of the last 6 or 7 years. And then here, the schedule of upcoming presentations. I would invite you to tune in. So on March 4th, we'll talk about general support, employee benefits, facilities, transportation. March 18th, athletics, co-curricular. And then down the calendar of presentations, we would go. All of these presentations, we certainly invite the community to come in person, join. You can speak on agenda-related items. You can speak at the end during the public comment section. You're welcome to email us, certainly view the presentations once they're posted. They're generally going to be posted the following day. And we would just encourage you to be engaged in the process. The process for our public presentations has begun today. And we look forward to hearing from the community and answering any questions and obviously being transparent with the community. So that concludes the presentation. I just want to remind everyone that the budget vote is scheduled for May 21st, which is Tuesday, from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. at French Hill. And I don't anticipate there'll be snow in the forecast on May 21st.
Oh, yeah, you had to do that. Now you put something. All right, thank you. Lisa, do you have questions?
I don't have a question, but as we go through the budget process, could you keep track of questions that you get directly and then do something similar to what you did last week with like the top 5 most frequently asked questions?
That's a great idea. Absolutely.
Cheryl?
I have a question regarding forecasting kindergarten enrollment, what are some of the factors that you take into consideration when you do forecast that enrollment? Because it can be so tricky.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't necessarily know exactly, who's going to come at any point in time or who's going to come last minute. So what do you take into account when you try to determine that?
Great question. We look at all kinds of data. We had the enrollment study that Dr. Seversky performed for us back in 2019. Live birth data is the most commonly used metric to predict kindergarten enrollment 5 years out. We also now have the benefit of the pre-K program, where many of the students who are in the pre-K program have already established residency and registration in our district, and so that's a good predictor. What we also do is we keep track of how many appointments we've had for registration to date a year ago, and what did that result in terms of enrollment. So we're trending a little lower than we trended this past year, but for example, I can tell you that at the end of January last year, we had, and I'm making up numbers now because I didn't have those committed to memory, but at the end of January for Mohansick, we may have had 138 appointments for kindergarten registration, whereas this year maybe we have 110. So we'll look at, and in the prior year we may have had 90, and how many students were in the cohort that came in that September. So we look at all kinds of data to make the best possible projection that we can, but what it does not account for are new families that move into the district when a child's 2 or 3 years old. Live birth data won't help us necessarily with that information. And late registrants are difficult to account for because they wouldn't be in your count year over year at that point in time. So ultimately, all of the metrics that I shared with you get put together to give our best possible estimate of what kindergarten enrollment would be, but that's all it is an estimate.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Rashmi?
So there seems to be different factors at play trying to come up with this year's budget compared to some of the other years. So the big ones that I took away, and I think I'm missing one. So there was, the needs of the students, especially the special education needs. There's inflation, which we're all feeling. There was the transportation budget, and then state aid. Right. So would you say are those the big four, or are there more?
Yeah, I would add health insurance at 5%.
Yes.
I think that's a pretty
Yep.
substantial increase.
Yep.
And but yeah, I think you captured those big drivers in the budget, and it's going to be our work to prioritize needs of the district to be able to account for all of the variables that you just named.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Mike, did you have questions? Mike is joining us remotely.
I guess the one thing I would ask, I know the transportation piece is going to be a big impact. Where are we in that bid process?
So the bid went out last week, and we anticipate that we're going to have a walkthrough, I believe, at the end of this week, Thursday, and we anticipate the bid opening to be February 28th.
Thank you.
So we'll have more clarity before our next Board of Education meeting.
Kathleen?
I just wanted to circle back about the athletics and co-curricular on March 18th, if we're going to circle back with the modified sports.
Yes, that would be part of the
Discussion?
discussion at that time. Yes, correct.
Pete?
I'm good.
So I guess my question kind of dovetails onto what Rashmi was asking as we talk about the biggest drivers, and then we're talking about complying with the tax cap. So I think it's a big juggle this year. And especially when we have an unknown, we have some knowns. We kind of can guess what, some stuff is. We don't know what transportation is. And so I just want to make sure that you guys are really confident that we can handle the transportation contract increase, even though it's an unknown, and comply with the tax cap that we now have to send to the state and say, yeah, we're going to do this. So
That's a great point. And I think that's the conversation that we've been having, certainly at central administration, as we prepare these presentations for the board and for the community. I don't know where the transportation bid will come in, and that's a very, very important part of the budget development process. So I do believe that irrespective of where we are with the transportation bid, that this community would want to see us within and being compliant with the tax levy cap. That's my assessment. Certainly even from the bond proposition survey that we conducted, a tax neutral proposal was very important to our community. We were able to deliver that. I would anticipate we would see a similar response with regard to staying within the tax levy cap.
I totally agree. I have never been a proponent for busting a cap. I'm not looking to do it this year. I just think there's a lot of pressure on the district, and so I'm afraid there's going to be some really hard choices that have to be made depending on what that number is.
This will undoubtedly be the most challenging budget that I've ever developed for you and certainly in my prior district. This is going to be a challenge. And once we have those transportation numbers, we'll be able to create that prioritization list to determine what can we fund, what can't we fund, but certainly within the confines of the tax levy cap.
Okay, did we have other questions? Okay, so is the board okay to file the tax cap calculations as reported by March 1st? We are agreeing not to seek voter approval to exceed the tax cap levy, and we agree we're in compliance with the tax cap. To do that, we will require the use of estimated reserves. Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. You got it, Ron.